On the 4th of November 2004, 31-year-old veterinary technician Tracy Kraling was at work in a research laboratory at Regents Hospital in St. Paul, Minnesota, in the United States. She was working alone, using a large piece of equipment known as an autoclave to sterilize medical equipment. This particular autoclave was a walk-in machine about the size of a closet, 1 square meter or 8 square feet in size. Its size allowed it to accommodate large pieces of equipment, like trolleys or wheelchairs, and also meant that employees could enter the machine in order to load and unload it. During normal use, employees would load the autoclave with equipment that needed to be sterilized, then exit and shut the door, starting the machine's automatic cycle. Jets of high-pressure steam would be directed over the contents of the autoclave, completely cleaning and sterilizing everything therein from every angle. On this day, when Tracy entered the machine either to load or unload equipment, the door shut behind her. The machine began its automatic cycle with her still inside. There was no way to open the door from the inside, and no way for her to communicate with anyone outside. There was nothing she could possibly do to escape. She was burned severely by jets of scalding, high-pressure steam. Her colleagues found her inside the machine later that day, and she was taken directly to the hospital's own burns center, where she received treatment, but her injuries were too severe, and she passed away the following day. An investigation was launched by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, and several troubling patterns were identified. Staff had, it emerged, noted issues with the door of the autoclave shutting unexpectedly. Sometimes doors being opened and closed in adjacent rooms of the lab created sufficient suction or airflow to cause the door of the autoclave to slam shut. Worried about being trapped inside, employees had taken to using a block of wood to stop the door. The hospital's maintenance department had also installed a latch to keep the door open, but on the day of Tracy's death, neither improvised safety measure had been effective. Though many staff stated after the accident that the autoclave had been a source of concern for them, there were no formal complaints on record. OSHA issued the hospital with a $75,000 fine and noted that the autoclave should have been fitted with safety features such as a panic bar to open the door from the inside, or an emergency stop button accessible from inside the machine. Tracy was remembered as a strong and determined woman. She was survived by her husband, Brad Kraling, who she had married just 1 month before the accident. On the 27th of July 2010, 14-year-old Wyatt Whitebread of Mount Carroll, Illinois, confessed something to the mother of one of his friends as she drove him home from a local pizza place. He wasn't enjoying his first ever paid job. He had been truly excited to be offered paid work at a local grain storage facility. But now, a few weeks in, he was finding the work exhausting, repetitive, and unpleasant. "I wish I never have to see another kernel of corn for the rest of my life," he admitted. But he wouldn't get the respite he wished for. The very next day he would be back at the plant, working again, dealing with billions of kernels of corn. Wyatt's job, alongside his friends 19-year-old Alex Pacas and 20-year-old Will Piper, was to walk down the corn in a grain storage bin at the nearby Consolidated Grain and Barge Company. During processing, grain is usually stored in large silos or bins, tall, circular, windowless metal towers, each of which can contain a huge quantity of grain. Product is loaded into these bins from the top using augers or elevators. When it is time for some or all of the grain to be removed, a port in the bottom of the bin will be opened and the grain will naturally flow out. Sometimes, during this process, clumps of grain will block the port and stop the flow. Workers are tasked with walking down the grain, entering the bin and breaking up clumps of grain using sticks or shovels. This was exactly what Alex, Will, and Wyatt were doing on the morning of the 28th of July 2010. When the grain beneath their feet became unstable. In rapid succession, all three sunk to their knees into the grain and found themselves unable to escape. Within just minutes, as the grain shifted and slid, they had sunk down into the mass of product in the bin and were almost entirely engulfed. Wyatt was completely submerged beneath the corn. All that remained visible of Alex was one hand and the top of his head, while Will, for the time being, managed to keep his head above the tide of grain. They called for help, and a nearby supervisor rushed to try and assist. Within minutes, the emergency services were on scene. A 6-hour operation to dig out the trapped workers followed, involving nearly 200 people and dozens of vehicles and specialist pieces of equipment. It was arduous work. Some rescuers later likened the corn to damp concrete, a heavy, clumpy material that was almost impossible to work with. Due to the heat of the day and the demanding nature of the work, several rescuers were themselves hospitalized due to heat-related illness. Will, whose head remained above the corn, was saved by the use of a tube forced into the corn around his head to prevent any more grain falling in and suffocating him. This kept him alive, but extracting him took hours, for much of which he was trapped in close proximity to the dead bodies of his 2 friends. Indeed, Will was the only one to survive the accident. Alex and Wyatt, the later of whom had been too young to legally be working inside the bin, died of suffocation minutes after being buried. Again, OSHA launched an investigation. In this case, it was very clear what had gone wrong. Grain entrapment is a known issue and claims dozens of lives each year. Unstable mounds of grain can suck workers under in seconds. Complete burial is very often fatal, as the granular material exerts huge pressure on the human body. Walking down the grain is known to be a hazardous procedure, and should be done while wearing a safety harness and lifeline. Even then, actually walking on the grain should be avoided if at all possible, and any equipment draining grain should be switched off while employees are inside the bin itself. In this case, for convenience and to save on cost, none of these safety measures were in place. Indeed, the 3 trapped workers had not been aware that grain entrapment was a thing that could happen. They had been told by their supervisor, "Control the corn. Don't let the corn control you," but did not know what this actually meant. Their entrapment in the grain would have come as a complete surprise, and once it begun, there was very little chance of survival for any of them. On the 20th of August 2024, several workers were in the middle of a shift at the Arvind milk factory in Kakalur in India. Among them was 30-year-old K. Umarani, a contract worker. She and her colleagues were engaged in their usual work of picking plastic packets of milk from a conveyor belt and stacking them in large plastic crates ready for shipment. At one point, as Umarani leaned over the conveyor belt, a long trailing shawl she wore around her neck became caught in the mechanism. Within seconds, she found herself being pulled towards the conveyor belt. Soon, her hair became trapped as well. Her colleagues rushed to shut off the equipment, but the aisles of their workspace were blocked by the plastic crates they were working with. They could reach neither Umarani nor the conveyor belt's emergency stop in time. Umarani was dragged headfirst into the conveyor belt mechanism, suffering catastrophic injuries to her head and neck. She died at the scene. In the aftermath of the accident, production at the facility was suspended, and police launched an investigation. One supervisor employed at the factory was arrested and questioned, but factory management protested that the accident had taken place in what was considered a low-risk area. They noted that standard operating procedures prohibited the wearing of shawls like those that Umarani had been wearing, but that this prohibition had not been enforced. It was also suggested that Umarani herself had been at fault for leaning too close to the conveyor belt as she worked. Going forward, all workers at the facility would be required to wear a buttoned overcoat and cap to prevent trailing hair and clothes from coming into contact with machinery. Umarani was survived by her husband and 2 children. Representatives of the family are still seeking compensation for the unnecessary loss of her life. In each of these cases, an incredibly simple and obvious safety measure, a panic bar, a harness, an overcoat, could have prevented a horrific and unnecessary death, if only it had been implemented before an accident took place.